Rigtig hjertelig velkommen tilbage til en KinaNørderne special. Den her, den bliver på engelsk, ligesom nogle af de få, vi også har. Mit navn er Kasper Wigman, jeg er den ene KinaNørd, og i mit selskab, der har jeg...
Mads Vester Nielsen, den anden KinaNørd. Vi sidder to forskellige steder, linket op med hver vores mikrofon-setup denne gang.
Og det er simpelthen, fordi vores gæst sidder i Taipei, i Taiwan. And our guest today is Alex Colville, researcher at the China Media Project. Welcome to the podcast, Alex.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. Alex, maybe if we can start with your journey into China Media Project, and why and how you ended up in Taipei.
Well, that's quite a story. So if you had told me about 7-8 years ago that I would be doing the work I currently do, which is monitoring how Chinese propaganda is encoded into Chinese AI models, I would have laughed in your face. I initially started out thinking I was going to be a journalist based in London. And at that time, I was writing for papers like The Economist. And then the thing was, I got bored. And I was about 23, 24. I made a life-changing decision without really thinking it through properly. And I took a tutoring job in Beijing, which was only meant to last for about 6 months. I thought, great, I'll make some contacts. I'll try and rudimentarily learn a language. I'll just go to a part of the world which everyone wants to know about and yet still knows very little about. So, yeah, I took this private tutoring gig in October 2019. The COVID happened. The borders initially closed. And so, yes, I then spent the next 3 years, all the way through COVID, just living in Beijing, working there, starting to work for companies like China Britain Business Council. I started a column for a company called the China Project. And then I found a company called the World of Chinese, which we kind of in our field say is kind of like the New Yorker, but with Chinese characteristics in both the good and the bad sense of that. And I started covering the impact of the zero COVID policy on ordinary people's livelihoods. And it was getting towards 2022, the zero COVID policy was getting more and more dark. There were holes showing in it. But because Xi Jinping himself had given his seal of approval, that meant that no one could really point out the problems with the policy. It was getting to the stage where I would interview an artist who had scrawled across a COVID testing booth in Beijing, I have already been numb for the past 3 years. And he gets arrested the next day by the police and put away for longer than Ai Weiwei was arrested in, I think it was 2015. And the only reason why he was let out was because of the white paper protest and the ending of the policy. But it was becoming very dystopic quite quickly. And so for me, that was a moment of profound disillusionment, a moment of realizing that on paper, this system can work fine, but because of the nature of the power structures in China and the nature of those power systems, things can go awry very quickly, but there is no way to have accountability for that. So then, yes, I left China after 3 years. I then went back to the UK, still carried on freelance work, then did a coding course at Columbia University. And then I decided I was going to carry on my Chinese language learning in Taiwan. I'd heard from friends that actually the quality of language learning in Taiwan is better than it is in China. So I thought, well, that sounds interesting. And then, in a nutshell, I found China Media Project. And I'd always read their work, and I thought their research was particularly good. And I suppose because of the nature of information flows in China, I thought it was something that was relatively under-researched. And having gone through zero COVID, you would notice quite quickly how China's media system really did influence people's ideas on the subject. Like you could go to, I was once riding in a taxi in Changsha in Hunan, and the taxi driver starts saying to me, we got onto the conversation of the zero COVID policy. And he said, well, I feel sorry for all those Americans after what they did with Fort Detrick. And Fort Detrick was a conspiracy theory that was set up by China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs in reaction to public international outcry about the possibility that COVID could have originated from a lab in Wuhan. And so China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in retaliation, started saying there was a possibility that it might have actually originated in an American lab based in Fort Detrick. And this taxi driver treated it as fact that it had happened. And I said, how do we know this has happened? And he looked at me and said, well, it's because the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said so. So the power, I suppose, that political system has over hearts and minds domestically is something we really still shouldn't be underestimating. So I thought there are very few companies that are still doing this sort of work. So I thought, why not? My company wanted someone who had familiarity with coding. And then we started noticing there was more and more AI-based media in 2024. And so I started increasingly looking at that. That slowly became my beat here. And we didn't really expect it to suddenly take off, just, for example, after DeepSeek. And the amount of power that China has managed to gather for itself in terms of AI and how much suddenly there is to monitor it. Yes, that's a bit long-winded, but that's my story, essentially.
So what are you working currently in relation to, or what are you working on currently in relation to China?
Yeah, so what I'm working on at the moment is, actually, I'm working on quite a few things. So at the moment, and as I'm sure you know, China has a strategy when it comes to AI, which is both to increase the amount of AI deployment that there is domestically, but also to utilize AI in order to fulfill pre-existing strategies on the geopolitical side they've had for decades, in this case, just to increase their influence. So domestically, what I'm interested in is, for example, the State Council has said that by the end of 2027, they would like, I think it's 70% penetration rate of AI into multiple different fields of Chinese life, Chinese society. But then internationally, they are floating, for example, multiple different international cooperation mechanisms, such as the World AI Cooperation Organization, which is still pending as to what that will look like. But also slowly, organically realizing that a certain policy called open source, or known as open source, rather. Sorry, should I explain what open source is, first of all?
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. I'm sure there are some of our listeners who might not be entirely sure what it really is.
Sure. Okay, so in which case I'll go back a little bit. So one strategy that the Chinese government has hit on is that something known as open source. Open source is a form of AI which, unlike, for example, ChatGPT, which is something which developers cannot actually download and play around with the code and create a new model. Chinese AI models are now generally, but still not all of them, are largely open sourced. That means that developers can take the code, they can take an AI model, they can download it, they can adapt it, they can reuse it, they can create something new with it. The idea is that this will be able to empower the global south. It will be able to empower different narratives, different cultural values. around the world, as opposed to what is considered a Western-centric, hegemonic power base, whereby the US uses the latest technology in order to continue its hegemony over the world. But what I have been looking at is how Chinese AI is made to conform to the Chinese government's standards of what is and is not safe. There are multiple companies working in this space who are putting forward the argument that because China's AI space is so heavily regulated, that must mean that it is safe by international standards. But the key question is, whose definition of safe is being used in this context? And so in my own work, I have been playing around with a lot of different AI models, both created by Chinese companies, but then also international AI models that, because of the open source policy, have been adapted, downloaded, rearranged by international companies. And we're finding Chinese information guidance in multiple different models from California, from Uganda, Malaysia, Japan, Germany, which are repeating certain Chinese propaganda narratives.
Alex, I would like to ask you, why do you think it's important for countries like Denmark and EU to better understand China and its global world, also when it comes to your field with AI and the narratives that are being pushed?
Can I put it this way? So I think at the moment what we're seeing is increasingly sophisticated propaganda tactics from the Chinese side. But I would say mentalities within the EU as to what Chinese propaganda is that are very outdated. So think of it this way. Imagine for a moment that you guys aren't China watchers. You haven't been looking at China for ages, for years. You are a journalist in, for example, a Danish newspaper like Berlingske, and you have been told in February 2025, your editor tells you that there is a hot new AI model out of China called DeepSeek, which, according to reports, is just as competitive as things coming out of Silicon Valley. But you know that it's from China, so chances are there's going to be some form of information, like Chinese Communist Party guidance as to what it can and can't tell you. You have one question that you can ask this model to test that assumption. What do you ask it?
It's a funny anecdote because I was actually working as an Asia and China correspondent in Beijing for Danish TV station when it came out, and their angle was the censorship angle, because you could see it censor in real time about Tiananmen, Xi Jinping, and it would give you an answer, flesh out the answer, but then backtrack and delete it, and then write, okay, sorry, I can't talk about that.
Yeah, the self-censoring. But as I say, like what question, if you had no knowledge about how Chinese propaganda works, what question would you ask it?
I guess we're too deep into it. So, but yeah, do go on. What is the question?
Everyone essentially would ask more or less the same question. What happened on June 4th, 1989? Is Taiwan an independent country? Or what is Falun Gong? Like, things that we know that the Chinese leadership has an angle on. And what will the model respond? Exactly as you say. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't answer this. It's censored. So you get people from Silicon Valley saying, we're going to uncensor this model because it's open source. That means it's going to cut down on costs. That means it will be very useful for people if they can just get rid of those, as one Silicon Valley CEO told the Wall Street Journal at the time, as long as we can get rid of this quote unquote half-baked censorship. So you also, even now, when you see people trying to test in papers online, for example, in Archive, which is a very prestigious AI developer research hub, they will ask more or less the same questions in their evaluation benchmarks, exactly on those lines. It's Tiananmen, Tibet, Taiwan, Xinjiang, all of these ones. But this isn't really how Chinese propaganda works. The way to think about it is more actually the way that the Chinese leadership talks about it, which is they call it public opinion guidance. Now, how do you guide someone to think the way you want to think? It's not just about withholding sensitive information. It's what information do you choose to fill that void with? So what I recently did actually is I managed to get one of Alibaba's hot new AI models called Quen. It's now on Quen 3.5, but only 2 months ago it was Quen 3. I got one of those models and I managed to hack it through a process called think token forcing, which is basically where you trick the AI model into revealing how it's been aligned to talk about certain topics, in this case, China. And I asked it a very simple question, which is, what is China's international reputation? Nothing to do with Tiananmen, nothing to do with Taiwan. And the model then generates a list of how it's been told in fine-tuned to talk about China. And it includes right at the top, I must give positive and constructive information. I must withhold all negative information. So what the answer is generated is just nothing but positive opinions about, for example, China's contribution through the BRI, about its ability to generate environmentally friendly technology. And it would go on such as this. So this is much more subtle. And when you ask that question, for example, but rephrase it, what is Kenya's international reputation or what is Belgium's international reputation? It will say, I must give both positive and negatives. So as I say, what we're now seeing is AI that it can be used as a much more subtle propaganda tool. And as, for example, Quen models are now one of the most downloaded set of models on the internet today. In fact, they overtook Llama. They are now the most downloaded open source models on the internet. This becomes a real concern. I do believe that large language models have the power to replace Google as our go-to for information searches. And if China has this competitive advantage over this new technology, this go-to technology, or the future technology of information searches, then they have a golden opportunity to redress, as they would call it, an information space which is too Western-centric, which shuts out what they would call Chinese narratives and what we would call Chinese propaganda.
Alex, I believe the term is 正能量, right? Positive energy. Casper and I, we've also...
It is literally a line to generate positive messaging. Yeah. This Quen AI model, as far as I can tell, yes, it's designed to give the official view on multiple different topics, such as, for example, China's political system. But then, when it comes to trying to shape international opinion, it will just give positive information on a variety of topics in English. This wasn't done in Chinese.
So recently, you, together with your colleagues from China Media Project, you authored the report Guided Intelligence on AI. What was this report about? Is it some of the themes that you mentioned here? And
yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the work?
Yeah, so that is actually... Sorry, I should have said that's actually what that report is about. I've essentially more or less outlined it to you. It took a lot of work, but it was just downloading a lot of large language models that were created by multiple different companies and built off of Chinese AI models and trying to see how effectively they were able to get certain Chinese public opinion guidance or positive messaging out of it. And so I tested across 10 different models at least. And I was finding this form of information guidance prevalent in all of them in some form. Some had trained it out better than others, but it seemed like because they had built off of this base model, it was impossible for them to remove it entirely. And it would come up in very erratic and unpredictable ways. There was one model that came out of Malaysia where All it took was an accidental typo in one question to go from a relatively neutral international answer oriented to international information systems to essentially the Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson speaking to you through the machine using classic government slogans. So yeah, that's what we found. But it was also just a broader investigation of China's international AI strategy and how it intersects with their attempt to, as I mentioned earlier, to what they would consider rearranging a supposedly, in their eyes, unfair information space internationally, which is dominated by Western legacy media, and emphasizes what they would consider unfair or what they would argue are fake stories, which China would like to redress with its own narratives.
So, Alex, how do you see the Chinese approach to AI differing from that of Western countries, both European and American as well?
Yeah, there are multiple ways they differ. Firstly, because of course China has the handicap of not having access to the most cutting edge AI chips. This is because of the United States export controls, which have recently been loosened under the Trump administration. So a lot of their strategy at the moment is trying to find ways around that strategic bottleneck. And so we're finding interesting papers coming out of Chinese AI labs that are addressing efficiency problems with AI models. So AI at the moment across the board, everywhere in the world, has an efficiency problem. AI models run on humongous amounts of electricity and are still not, they are, how to put this, they are almost on a parallel now with human intelligence. And yet at the same time, human intelligence runs on whatever you yourself had for lunch today, which is much more efficient in terms of power. This is something that if the current way that the US AI strategy has gone so far is inevitably going to have to reckon with. But because of the export controls, I would argue they've given China a head start in terms of working out how to address these efficiency problems. So as I say, that's one part of their strategy, which the US doesn't really have to deal with because it has all of the resources. And then secondly, they're not really looking to do what the US is, such as Anthropic, OpenAI, the rush towards AGI. You have Chinese AI labs saying that their raison d'etre is also to create AGI, but the government, who is more interested in trying to create technology, supposedly, that can help ordinary people's lives and that can be solved. You also have much stricter national planning from the Chinese side than you do in the US. As I mentioned earlier, the State Council has this desire to push 70, have an AI penetration rate of 70% into the country. As to whether or not they can do that is up for debate. There are some who believe that they can't. But in terms of that, but then you see the United States trying, or rather the federal government trying very hard to ensure that there is no states-based regulation. But then again, also repealing the Biden executive order. The Biden executive order, I think it was towards the end of the Biden administration. President Biden implemented an executive order which would allow from greater scrutiny of AI labs and their safety testing. The Trump administration, I think it was on only the second day of his presidency, he repealed that executive order. So it's only in a handful of states where you have safety regulations being imposed on these multiple AI labs. whereas China has much more of an emphasis on the regulation side. And I suppose because they're trying to penetrate AI into multiple different parts of society, I suppose you could argue, and indeed some people do, that this emphasis on balancing development with safety in the long run is going to be more effective than what seems to be the US policy, the US administration's policy of laissez-faire. Finally, the US is quite isolationist when it comes to international AI governance, whereas China is trying to expand into this space as fast as it can, trying to encourage multiple different countries to create up frameworks whereby they can share, or rather come to an agreement on how to regulate AI. And also, as I mentioned earlier, trying to set up an international mechanism to improve AI governance. So as the US retreats in international AI governance, the Chinese government is trying to expand internationally. So I hope that wasn't too long-winded. But there we are.
I mean, we're called the China nerds, so there's definitely room to just geek out on whatever you feel you want to geek out on. What are you touched a little bit upon it, but what are some of the real implications of China's AI development for Europe, also with AI governance and the Global Development Initiative? Because we've talked in the podcast a lot about Xi Jinping's many initiatives, many global initiatives. On the AI side, do you think that Europe is even aware of where China is headed and how fast they're going there?
Oh dear. Well,
it's a big question, I know.
I'm afraid I'm based in Taiwan, so I feel like you might have a better answer for this than I do. But I suppose you could say I get the sense that there is already raised awareness amongst the general population within the EU that, possibly besides Hungary, that there is that Chinese technology has certain guidances or certain values encoded into it, which may differ from what are European values. I think the problem is going to be whether or not that awareness, that lack of trust actually balances out, for example, in an AI startup, the costs. So as I mentioned earlier, Chinese AI is predominantly, not entirely, but predominantly open source, meaning that multiple AI startups can already save a certain amount of money by choosing an open source form of the technology. As to whether or not they trust it on certain answers, they may actually be more concerned about the bottom line of their margins. So, yeah, I think they're much more, that's the way that I think it's more likely to be adopted, especially as, if I remember rightly, the EU AI Act stipulates only that someone has to be told that they are being spoken to by AI, not which AI model is being used, though. So I think that may be a way that AI becomes adopted, Chinese AI becomes adopted in the EU, whether or not there is a general sense of trust of it.
Alex, I wonder, with your insight and also all the research you have done in AI, and the focus that we now see from different parts of the world to actually adapt values to different continents, different, you can say, centers of power. Do you think we're moving towards, American tech and AI companies having a certain kind of value set that are propelled from there, EU having another one, China having a third, and so on, because AI and the different ways you can influence narrative across the world is simply so effective? I mean, you are much more in the nitty gritty in this field than I am. So sometimes when I see both the Chinese strategy on this area, but also how we discuss this in Europe now, there's a big discussion in Europe about building up our own tech companies, strengthening our own AI tools, perhaps to break away from the reliance on American tech.
Especially.
I know it's a broad question, but I think it is really an important question of our times, and perhaps a direction that we're seeing. But I would like to hear what you think.
Sure. So I think every single government around the world has suddenly realized that AI is now not just about AI, it's about power. I think the EU is aware of that. The US is certainly aware of that. The US AI Action Plan says that the US needs to ensure that it, quote unquote, dominates AI going forward in the international space. Xi Jinping has called AI having the potential to have a, quote unquote, lead goose effect, which I just quite like as a term. And what that means is it's in reference to a flock of geese in flight in a V formation. The goose at the front is the one which is dictating the direction that all the rest of the other geese go. So I think multiple different power centers, the EU, the US, China, all around the world know that this can be a way to project their own values out into the world through harnessing and leading this new technological revolution. You also have multiple different governments around the world in the global south realizing that this is also their chance to influence regional politics, launching AI action plans of their own in all sorts of different parts of the world, East Africa, West Africa, South America. So I would argue actually in that way, in that sense, China's desire to harness the power of AI is actually no different from any other international government around the world.
Maybe we can touch a little bit more about the role of media analysis in understanding China today. How would you describe the role and the importance?
The role of media analysis in
understanding China today.
The role of media analysis in understanding China today. Yeah, so I think I've briefly touched upon it. The problem with being external or outside of China at the moment is that unless you have personal contacts within China, and you're not on the ground yourself, all we really have to go on is media from China, be it social media, traditional media, AI-generated media. It's all more or less the same thing, and all of it is, as I said earlier, part of a system which is tightly guided by the party. It's about curation. It's about presentation, both domestically and internationally. So trying to kind of penetrate that, I think, is still very important. But nonetheless, when it comes to media analysis, as I mentioned earlier with my conversation with this taxi driver, it's still very important, I think, to know how the majority of the mainstream audience in China are going to think about a certain topic because of the way that the information space is being guided by government. I can give you another example where during COVID, I was sitting in a restaurant and struck up a conversation with one gentleman who started telling me, I feel so sorry for you, you democratic countries. Because you have this democratic system, it means that you can't contain COVID because you can do whatever you want. Whereas in a one-party system, we have been able to eradicate COVID. This was in 2020 through to 2021, when admittedly China had done a very good job. But at the same time, so had South Korea, so had Taiwan, so had Japan, all democratic countries. So this was quite clearly something that the party was using this success they were using this success in order to bolster their own credentials among the populace, to prolong the social contract whereby you have no democratic freedoms, but we still keep you safe nonetheless and look after you.
Alex, I would like to ask you a little bit more regarding your time when you were writing from China. For example, when you were writing for the China Project and also for the World of Chinese, because Casper has been posted as a correspondent, but you were there as I guess first freelance writer for China Project and later as a employee at the China Project. At the World of Chinese. How did you find it to write these stories in China? I remember you and I, we were in the hutongs at one point where you were writing one story about Hu Xijin, wasn't it?
Oh, yes.
I think for the China Project. Yeah.
Yes, and we started talking to that man at that newspaper outlet, and he started asking, "Why are you asking so many questions? Are you a spy or something?" Half joking, half not. But sorry, could you just kind of repeat the question?
Yeah, I think we know several journalists who work as posted correspondents to China, but you were working as a freelancer,
yes,
writing from China,
yes,
and I guess that's also that's just another type of experience that I think many of our listeners they might be interested to know. How do you do that?
Right. Okay. So this is a problem. There was someone who approached me on LinkedIn, I think in the middle of 2024. And he said to me, I am a Yenqing scholar based in Beijing, and I would like to become a journalist. I would like to know how you managed to do what you did, and maybe that's a career path I can try. And I had to think for a while, and I suddenly realized that even 2 years later, the career path that I had made to work for me in China is no longer an option. So, for example, you have the fact that the China Project, where a lot of China watchers of our generation found their feet and managed to start writing, the China Project has closed down. The World of Chinese has its own difficulties, and then there's also issues with just, I suppose, if you try and write something and you are not on the right visa to be asking questions, that can be dangerous for you. You could do what some people do, which is go on a student visa and then try and gather information and publish it as soon as you're outside China. But that also can be a rather risky strategy, because what if it's something that is dangerous to say? There was one person who wrote something for the FT who was a Yenqing scholar, and he now has been advised not to go back to China by his former professors. So it's a bit of a tough situation, and people I speak to in this space who are journalists still based in China, they find it very difficult. For a start, if you're a journalist at a US-based outlet now in China, it's highly likely that you're not going to be able to get a J visa, that is a journalist visa, process to go into China. And I believe that there has only been one J visa processed for a US outlet for the past 4 years, I think. And that's because I think there's supposedly a media going on where the Chinese leadership is unhappy about the way that the United States has designated certain Chinese state media outlets And so this is meant to be some form of war of attrition, at least from what I've been hearing from journalists inside China. So you're not able to get journalists coming in to replace former US journalists. So I suppose your option would be to try and do some form of writing for a European paper, perhaps. But even then, as I say, if you're freelancing, there is continually that risk. I would say that the work that I was doing when I was freelancing was relatively safe. I wouldn't say it was something to do with Xi Jinping. I tried to steer clear of politically sensitive topics because I didn't want to be thrown out of the country. Yeah.
I mean, now you're as a lot of people are as trying to gauge China from abroad. Obviously, I mean, the lack of information and the lack of people is something that is a big issue when you're doing that. And for Denmark, we only have one correspondent based in Shanghai, and then one based in Hong Kong who can access mainland. But other than that, I mean, there's one person who's covering all of Asia, not just China. But what do you see as some of the biggest challenges, despite the obvious, or asides the obvious of not getting access to talking to average people? And also some time ago, Mads and I interviewed Emily Fung, the journalist of National Public Radio in the US, and she said some of her best stories just came, like, randomly appeared just by talking to people. So just the lack of access to talking to your 老百姓or your average Chinese is, of course, a big one. What do you see as some of the big hurdles?
Well, I think the most important one is that you lack nuance, I suppose, in your coverage. And that's just an unavoidable problem, I would say, at the moment. If you're not on the ground, you can't see, for example, past what the information feeds would like you to see. One example I can think of is during the zero COVID lockdowns in Beijing in 2022. There was one article from a major international newspaper which talked about the difficulties people in Beijing were facing. They were unable to go to restaurants. They were unable to go here, there. But actually, as I was on the ground, you just walk along the street and you'd see everyone trying to exploit every single loophole they could. Yes, people were banned from eating in restaurants. So what they would do is just take the tables outside and do 大排档, like just eating out, as it's called. And so, yeah, because this journalist wasn't on the ground, she couldn't see that actually it was a lot more varied, and people were finding ways around these regulations. I would say that's the most important thing. And this is a tragedy of the way that the system has been set up, is that the journalists can no longer go on the ground. They can no longer get that nuance. And indeed, it sometimes even feeds into things that I see from the Global Times saying that Western journalists don't understand China. You see, their reporting is so unnuanced. But that's, of course, because these people are not allowed to go on the ground. So yeah, that becomes a weapon in and of itself that is used by the state media apparatus.
Alex, now since you returned to Taiwan from a recent trip to Europe, what are you working on now? If you can share that with our listeners, what are some of the projects that you're looking at for the foreseeable future?
For the foreseeable future, it's going to be monitoring the expansion of Chinese AI models into different parts of the world, and China's attitudes towards regulation, towards AI safety, and how that is going to feed into its long-term geopolitical goals, including, yes, I suppose in terms of, for example, encouraging the adoption of, for example, its non-interference policy in terms of geopolitics. Because this is something that we are noticing. AI is developing very fast as well. I would like to do more work now on AI agents, given there has been a sudden appearance in the mainstream, both in Europe, America, and China of AI agents that can be used by consumers problematically and with very little safety regulation, but nonetheless, they can still be used. How is the party going to regulate that? Genuinely, there are safety issues with the way that AI agents currently work, but are they going to be shaped in accordance of 人工智能安全, AI safety? China has something known as the Comprehensive National Security Concept, which has different strands coming off of it, which includes, I think, ecological security, information security, but then also AI security now. That's a relatively new addition. So yes, how are AI agents going to be made safe by Chinese standards?
So earlier, Casper asked what the implications for some of these strategies relating to AI they are for Europe. And I would like to ask that now, since I think we're seeing a more assertive sort of thought process from Europe and different leaders in Europe on trying to thread out a European direction on this theme. What do you think we can, I don't know, learn, or how some of looking at China's approach to AI can inform what we can do in Europe? Do you understand the question, or does it make sense?
Oh, kind of. Yeah. So the way that China, or at least Chinese regulators, look at the way that the EU has tried to govern AI, they say that the EU's AI Act actually smothers innovation. It means that technology companies are too bogged down with regulation to be able to actually move as fast as they can in this space. What the Chinese side does is emphasize standards, which are non-binding, collectively shaped by different players within the AI industry, but under the party's remit. So I think what we're seeing is that the EU AI Act is being streamlined. So perhaps the EU has already taken that into account. I think that's the best I can give you in terms of an answer on that one, I'm afraid.
Sure. Alex, I think we've covered a lot of great angles on the subject. And I was thinking that if any of our listeners are interested in exploring the theme of AI and China, could you recommend some different resources or maybe books? There are already a number of books out there, but I would actually say probably too many on the subject of AI and China. So what do you find what do you find as good resources that you could recommend to people who are perhaps not as acquainted with the theme?
Okay. The problem that you have is this information space, or at least AI, is now moving so fast that by the time someone writes a report or by the time someone writes a book, it's already kind of out of date. So I wouldn't really recommend a book per se, unless it's The Empire of AI by Karen Howell, which gives you just a great grounding in how AI as it currently stands works and how it was shaped in Silicon Valley. Because most Chinese tech workers in AI labs are still watching what happens in the US very closely and are most likely to adopt their next strategy or idea based on what America is doing. So I still think that would be relevant. Frankly, it's just a lot of newsletters that I have. China Talk does work on AI, so does Jeffrey Ding, who runs the Chin AI Substack. There's also, let me see. There's Interconnects AI, which is run by a man called Nathan Lambert, which is also on Substack. There are multiple different players in that field who are doing good work. And Bill Bishop's Cynicism, which was my education when I started out in China. just reading. I subscribe to that newsletter, and I still read it religiously every day.
I mean, he is the guy for a reason, and he's been doing it for such a long time. So I'd agree with you.
No, but that newsletter is very essential, I'd say, if you're just starting out. In fact, it's essential even now.
Do you have anything concluding for our listeners about China, Taiwan, or in general before we wrap this up?
No, not off the top of my head. I'm sure something will come to me as soon as we stop, but not off the top.
And also for our listeners, if people want to follow your great work, both for China Media Project and other reports, what's the best platform? Is it x.com, LinkedIn, or where can people find you?
Yeah, we have a Substack, which is called Linguisinica. That has multiple different bulletins on it. I write the China Chatbot Substack, which normally comes out twice a week, which is just keeping up with the latest developments in the Chinese AI ecosystem, policy, regulation frameworks, all of that. And also China Media Project. I write articles on there whenever time allows.
One final question now that you
I just thought there's also, I really would recommend the work in terms of if you want to know how China's AI policy is working. Scott Singer and Matt Sheehan over at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, they also do very, very thorough research. Sorry, that was another thing that just came to mind.
One final question now that you remind me about it, the Linguisinica. Could you briefly explain what that is and why people should follow it?
So are you talking about Linguisinica, the website, or are you talking about Linguisinica, the Substack?
The Linguisinica that you work with in China Media Project.
Yes. So there's Linguisinica, which is run by my colleague Dalia Perete, which is a monitor for multiple different media engagements by Chinese media companies around the world with other newspaper companies or traditional newspaper companies, traditional newspaper outlets, just in multiple different countries around the world, including reports on the media ecosystem on the ground and how much influence China currently has over it. It always amazes me what that part of the team finds because there really is so much once you start going looking.
Alex Colville, I think we've come to the end of the program. On behalf of both myself and Mads, thank you so much for taking some time to be our guest here on the podcast.
No, thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me.
And to all our listeners, do follow all the Substacks that Alex recommended, and especially China Media Project. I think it's a great resource that not necessarily a lot of Danish people know about and should utilize and use more. I mean, it's a great insight into a lot of aspects in China that helps us get China right. And as you all know, one of the main themes of Mads and I is that it's never been more important to get China right. So thank you again, Alex, for being our guest.
No, thank you for having me.
Thanks, Alex.
Og til alle jer lyttere, så er Mads og jeg selvfølgelig snart tilbage med endnu mere KinaNørderne og også endnu flere specials. Tusind tak, fordi I lyttede med.